Hi, this is Elliot Haspel, and welcome to another edition of Best Practices Weekly. Today we're going to be talking about how you can use scientists' stories to build the interest of students among science. And this comes from an article in the Journal of Educational Psychology, in which a professor from Columbia University and a professor from a Taiwanese university discussed this matter of motivation in science. And in the elementary grades, of course, it's not as hard to get students into science, but it's usually very focused on the flashy experiments, and that interest starts to taper off as students get older. And while these authors were focusing more on high school students, the lessons that they're talking about really apply across the board. And what they are talking about is that if we start to talk about scientists in terms of the stories of how they reached their accomplishments, of how they achieved their discoveries, and if we talk about those stories in one particular way, we actually start building students' interests and motivations, and actually build their academic achievement around science as well. What this really stems from is the fact that students can get very quickly a preconceived notion, a stereotype of what scientists are like. Whether that is that they're nerdy and so not like them, or whether that is that scientists are brilliant people who are just automatically super good at what they're doing because they're scientists. You know, you've got their white lab coats on and they're figuring stuff out. Because of that stereotype, it can be hard for students, especially low-performing students, or students who are naturally inclined to be interested in science, to sort of lose interest, lose motivation around science. And so, what the authors did a study of was they did a lesson with students about the stories of scientists, and they did two sort of types of stories. One was just teaching students about the accomplishments of famous scientists. In this case, they were focusing on physics, so they focused on Galileo, they focused on Newton, and they focused on Einstein. One group just got the, essentially, list of achievements. This is the great things that these people figured out. The other group got stories of the scientist's struggles. So for Galileo, they had to learn about how he had to fail on his way to trying to discover what he was figuring out, how he struggled personally, how he struggled in terms of the science failing. At first, when he was trying to figure out about motion, what sort of did he try to begin with, and what didn't work, and was he ridiculed for it, and X, Y, and Z about what he tried along the way to making the discoveries that he made. And similarly for Newton and for Einstein. And what they found was that in the students that received the stories of the scientists' struggles, especially for those students who were low-performing in science and who weren't particularly motivated by science, there were some significant effects. First of all, their long-term retention of science material went up. And so this is in terms of if you ask students a few weeks later about what they had learned in science, they were recalling it better than the other students who had just received stories about about the scientists' achievements. And this retention is mostly on these open-ended, complex science problems, less on the textbook science, less on the, how does the water cycle work, how does the, particular problem set of physics work, but more on these open-ended questions that require them to really persist, to use broader thinking. Those kind of problems is where this achievement was seen, in addition to retention. And then their motivation showed significant increases, especially among those students who are not so motivated to begin with. And so this might seem like sort of a simple strategy, but it actually seems to have potentially very powerful effects that if we teach students not just the content of the science, and not just who the scientists were, but actually the stories of scientists' struggles, it really normalizes science and normalizes scientists, and makes students more likely to engage, more likely to believe that there's common ground, and that leads not only to interest in motivation and increases in motivation, but it leads to increases in academic achievement around science as well. Thanks for watching. Happy teaching.